Hi, I'm Lori Wolf, and I'm with the NSRWA, and I manage the Water Smart program. The Expo is sponsored by the NSRWA, the Water Smart program, and Kennedy's Country Gardens. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few things. We are going to have questions at the end. So if you have a question, you can either type it in the chat or the Q&A, and then I'll go over those at the end. Now I would like to introduce Doug Tallamy. Doug is the professor of agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, author and founder of Homegrown National Park. With Bringing Nature Home, he changed the conversation about gardening in America. His second book, the New York Times bestseller, Nature's Best Hope, urged homeowners to take conservation into their own hands. Tonight, he will be presenting Next Steps for Nature. This talk addresses common concerns on biodiversity, invasive species, native plants, and conservation strategies, providing practical guidance and motivation to restore nature in everyday spaces. Now here's Doug.
All right, thanks, Lori. Next Steps for Nature was the title that I submitted to Timber Press, but they didn't like it. They changed it to How Can I Help? But we're talking about the same thing. I probably don't have to remind you that we are evolutionary guests on this planet, and our stay here is provisional. If we destroy our life support systems, then our stay is going to be a short one. And unfortunately, we seem bent on doing that. There's a lot of discussion about who's going to actually protect the nature that we all need, and I think it's going to be everybody because everybody needs it. There's nobody on this planet that doesn't need healthy, functioning ecosystems. Unfortunately, more and more of the people are accepting this responsibility, but they have a lot of questions, and they tend to send many of those questions to me. Now, these are people that have read my other books, have heard my talks. They still have really good questions. So I realized I was answering the same questions over and over again, decided to keep the answers and put them in the book that is now How Can I Help? It's 499 questions that people have asked me, and of course, their answers. And one of the first questions I get is, why didn't you make it 500 questions? We actually had a lot more than that, but Timber Press thought the book was too long, so they started to throw them out, and it ended up being 499. So I'm only going to talk about 498 tonight. Not really. But one of the first ones that I will address is one I get quite often, and that is, what got you interested in conservation? And there is a story attached to that. I was born loving nature, so it was immediate. I was immediately drawn to it. No secret there. But in third grade, we moved to Berkeley Heights, New Jersey, and new development called Oak Park, because oaks are what the bulldozers had knocked down to make the development. And our house was built on a circle, and we built them from right to left. So the lot to the left of us was undeveloped for a full year after we moved in. And there was a little pond on that lot. It looked just like this. I used to go to that pond every day after school and see what was happening. And in the spring, this is what was happening. Toads came and started to sing. I do not remember whether I knew they were males or not, but then bigger toads came and the singers hugged them, and I thought that was nice. They kept hugging them until eggs came. And of course, this is external fertilization. The males are hugging the females, and as the females lay their eggs, the males fertilize them. But this gave me an opportunity to watch metamorphosis, to watch those eggs turn into tadpoles, pollywogs, whatever you want to call them, swim around. This was great fun for me. Then the hind legs popped out, and then the front legs popped out, and then the tail started to get shorter. So I got to watch the whole thing, and just before they hop out onto the land, the tail disappears entirely, and they are really tiny at that point. Well, I wanted to be there the day that those little guys hopped out and started their terrestrial life, and I was all hunkered down. No, it's not really me. But that was the day the bulldozer came and buried that pond. Buried all my little friends. I'm sure Mr. Bulldozer Man did not see me. I ran away. But it did make an impression on me. And that impression was pretty much the same one that it was being made on a lot of people. We've got to save nature before people destroy it. It makes good sense. The problem is, most of us do not have the opportunity to save pristine habitat. But we all have the opportunity to restore what has been lost. In other words, we have to move beyond conservation and embrace restoration. We're not going to give up on conservation, but we've got to start to restore what has been lost in so many places, and we can do that. I could have gone right across to my backyard and dug another pond. I bet you my parents would have helped me. Could have saved a lot of the creatures in that pond, but it never occurred to me. Never occurred to me. So lost opportunity. Another question I get is why can't insects quickly adapt to non-native plants? Now we know that insects are very poor at eating non-native plants, or non-native plants are very poor at supporting insects, and that has caused great problems for the food web. But we also know that insects are pretty good at adapting to, for example, insecticides. Well, it's a very different process, and this is what happens when you spray a field like this with insecticides. There are a few individuals that already have some level of resistance. So they don't die, everybody else dies. Then the next generation, of course, there are more individuals that have some level of resistance, the next generation more, and then finally, pretty much everybody does. It doesn't take very long because the adaptations necessary to survive the insecticide were already in the population. And that's why insecticide resistance develops. It's a huge problem actually out there. Very different when we ask an insect to adopt a different host plant. So, for example, think of asking the monarch to start eating crepe myrtle. Monarch has been associated with milkweeds for many, many millions of years. So that'd be a big ask. And it's a big ask because of the number of adaptations, the number of mutations that have to occur in an insect's sensory apparatus to adopt a new host plant successfully. Now, this is a red spotted purple. Let's follow what happens if we're asking the red spotted purple to adopt a new host plant. The first thing is it's going to fly around, and there are hundreds of species of plants underneath it. It's got to pick out that new plant and recognize it as a potential host, which means there have to be changes in the antennae of this red spotted purple that say, okay, I now smell the perfume of this plant and it's an acceptable host. So that would be the first set of mutations that have to occur in the antennae. It then will land on this new host and taste the plant again. It's going to taste it with receptors on its tarsi, on its feet, to make sure that it is a plant that's acceptable. So you have to have simultaneous mutations in the receptors on the tarsi. Then before it lays an egg, and red spotted purples lay an egg right at the tip of black cherry leaves, it's going to taste the plant again with sensors on its ovipositor to say, yep, I am on the right plant. They don't want to put an egg on the wrong plant. All right, there's the egg at the end of the leaf. The first thing that's going to happen is the egg's going to hatch, and then the caterpillar will start to eat the egg shell because protein, a lot of protein in eggshells, and there's very little protein in plants. But after it eats the eggshell, it's going to start to eat the plant. And that means there have to be changes in the receptors in the mouth parts of the caterpillar that say this is an acceptable host plant. And then it has to be able to detoxify the defensive compounds that are in that new plant, which means you have to have mutations in the receptors or in the physiology of this caterpillar. So you're really talking about 5 different changes that have to happen pretty much simultaneously for an insect to adopt a new host plant. That is called a host switch. They do occur, but not very often. It is very difficult to get all those things to line up. Let's look at the monarch butterfly. Now, we know the monarch is a specialist on milkweeds, on plants in the milkweed lineage. We also know that black swallowwort, which is an invasive plant in the Northeast now, is in the milkweed lineage. It smells like milkweed, so the monarchs are flying around. They say, oh, there's a milkweed. They come down, they land on it. They taste it with the receptors on their tarsi, and they say, yeah, this is a milkweed. They lay an egg on it and say, yep, this is a milkweed. And that's where it all breaks down. Because when their eggs hatch, the monarch caterpillars cannot eat black swallowwort. It's a toxic plant to them. Now, we introduced black swallowwort as an ornamental in 1854. So after 170 years of opportunity, the monarch still has been unable to make that final set of the final mutations to allow it to actually survive on black swallowwort have not occurred, which just shows you how difficult it is for a host switch to actually happen. Okay, related question. You claim it takes thousands of years, if ever, for an insect to adapt to a new host plant. But some other entomologists disagree and point to several species of butterflies that now breed successfully on non-native plants. How do you explain that? Well, that is a good question, and I explain it this way. There's two ways that insects use new plants. One is the host switching that I just talked about, very difficult. The other one is host range expansion, and that is not very difficult. Most of the cases of butterflies or any insect eating a new host plant are host range expansions. And the difference between a host switch and a host range expansion is that you don't need any new adaptations. No mutations are required for a host range to occur. The insect already has the ability to eat that new plant. And let's look at the black swallowtail as an example. It, of course, is a specialist on plants in the carrot family. So golden Alexander, for example, would be one of its native host plants. But so it's adapted to eating plants in the carrot family. And plants in the carrot family apparently are so closely related, they share defensive chemistry quite a bit. So when we imported Queen Anne's lace and carrots and dill and parsley, black swallowtails already had all the adaptations necessary to use those plants. So they expanded their host range onto those plants. Again, no new adaptations had to occur, and that's why that happens. And just about all the cases where you have insects using non-native plants, it is a case of host range expansion. But even when you take all those cases into account, if you compare the host records on native plants versus the host records on non-native plants, there's about a 90% reduction. So if we were to lose our native plants and only landscape, for example, with non-native plants, we'd lose 90% of the insects that are out there. Why do insects fly towards light? This is a question that has been asked for more than 100 years, and it turns out that one of the original hypotheses is the correct one. Insects have what we call the dorsal light response. When they're flying, they always make sure light is coming down from above and it hits their dorsum, their back. And that's because the sun is always up in the sky. It's never underneath the insect. And the moon is always up in the sky. It's never underneath the insect. And if you put in a single light source like this, they still have the dorsal light response. They will fly so that the light is hitting their back. But that means they have to circle that light source. And they usually circle faster and faster and get close and then bang into it. And it's not good when that happens. So that is why insects are attracted to single light sources. We can use that information, though, to address a really serious environmental problem, and that is light pollution. It turns out that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines around the world. These are all the ways that nocturnal insects are being killed by lights at night. And we got a lot of lights out there at night. So let's think about what wavelengths the nocturnal insects are attracted to. They're the wavelengths that come from the moon, and they're largely in the UV spectrum. They're cold light, blue lights. So that's the solution. Change it to yellow lights, amber lights. And most of those insects are not attracted to amber lights at all. So simply changing your light bulb, switching out that white bulb for a yellow bulb can save millions of insects overnight. And we've got the spring and summer coming up. It's a great time to make this change. And if you use yellow LEDs, you can save millions of dollars too. Okay, I live in an area with lots of Lyme disease. Several websites suggest keeping large lawns because they're not attractive to ticks. And the sites also say I should get rid of brush piles because ticks love them. How can I contribute to local ecosystems without getting Lyme disease? It's a good question, and I have had Lyme disease 7 times, so I get it. Lyme disease is a real thing, and we have to be careful about it. But let's think about how we get Lyme disease. You get it from the deer tick, the black-legged tick, and deer ticks do not eat native plants. They do not eat leaf litter. They do not eat brush piles. What they need is blood, and they need it from their hosts, and their hosts are white-tailed deer, a mate on the deer, and small rodents. The white-footed mouse is one of the main hosts. So those are the hosts that the black-legged tick, the deer tick, need. And we've got Lyme disease now because we've had an explosion, an overabundance of white-tailed deer for a couple of decades now. When I was growing up, I found a deer footprint in our front yard, and it was such a big event. We made a plaster cast of it. Never saw the deer, but there were no deer ticks, no Lyme disease, and we had no problem at all. Now, of course, there's 12 deer standing in my front yard, probably right now if I looked out the window, and that overabundance has caused the explosion of the deer tick and the emergence of Lyme disease. So, what can we do? Well, research at the Carey Institute says a very good way to reduce the infectivity rates of the ticks in your yard is to increase the diversity of alternative hosts in your landscape. So I'm talking about other mammals. The ticks will bite other mammals, and many of these are dead-end hosts for Lyme disease. So things like skunks and chipmunks, whoops, and squirrels and possums and bunnies and raccoons and groundhogs. What is that? A weasel, foxes. These guys are all siphoning off the deer ticks, and they are not nearly as good a host as white-footed mouse is. So when you increase the diversity of alternate hosts, you lower the chances that even if you're bitten by a tick, that you're actually going to get Lyme disease. And there's a really good natural experiment that has occurred in this country, in the South. There are lots of deer in the South, and there are lots of deer ticks in the South, but there's very little Lyme disease. Why is that? Because the South has lizards. They've got several species of anoles. They've got species of skinks, and these guys are dead-end hosts. The ticks bite them. The Borrelia, the disease agent, dies in these dead-end hosts. So infectivity rates are very low, even though the ticks and the deer are both present. But let's also think about how you get a deer tick. You know, they don't run after you. They climb up on vegetation. They put out their little legs, and when you walk by, they grab on. That's called questing. So you want to minimize the opportunities for questing. And that is why big lawns do minimize the amount of ticks that are out there. But there's so many negative things associated with big lawns that you can minimize your chance of getting a tick and have a productive landscape by having a swath of grass, wide swath of grass that you can walk through. You keep this mowed, you keep it manicured. First of all, your neighbors will love this because it shows that you get what the current culture is. But you're shrinking the area of lawn, which is a great thing to do, which helps you manage the watershed. You're sequestering more carbon by having plants in your yard other than lawn. Lawn is the worst plant for sequestering carbon. You're going to help pollinators if these plants are native bloomers. You're going to help support a food web. You're going to favor native plants, all while you're minimizing your chances of picking up a deer tick. And during particularly the months of May and June, that's the time you really want to stick to your lawn. Don't go lay down in here because you will get ticks. Okay, the plants and animals. Plants and animals have always moved around the planet. So the arrival of new species at our shores is a natural process. So what's the big deal? If the new species are more fit than the species already here, then they deserve to replace them. I call this the they deserve it hypothesis. There's actually two questions here. What's the big deal about new species entering our ecosystems, and are new species more fit? Well, the big deal is the rate at which new species are coming to our shores. It is true, plants and animals moved around the world always, but at really, really slowly. So literally glacier paces or slower than that. It was typically continental drift that moved species around. So new species were entering ecosystems so slowly that the members of those ecosystems could adapt to those species and ecosystem function would not be compromised. We're now introducing new species thousands of times faster than they used to come into our ecosystems, much faster than the members, the communities in those ecosystems can adapt to those new species. So that's what the big deal is, the rate at which we're bringing new species to our shores. Are new species more fit than the natives that are already here? No. Now, we used to think they were because particularly plants, you know, they come in, they displace the natives, they're everywhere. So it seems like they're super plants, but they're not. They're simply here without their natural enemies. There are very few insects that can eat these plants. There are very few diseases that come over with these plants, and the mammal herbivores can't eat them. This is White Clay Creek State Park. It's a park near my house. I took this picture in March a couple of years ago when plants from Asia leaf out before plants from North America. That is the invasive species load in our natural areas. It's about 30% of the leaf material. It's a great time to see what your invasive species load is in March when the Asian plants leaf out first. So it does seem that these plants are just great. They can overcome our natives. But what's really happening here is that the deer can't eat them. So there are very few insects that can control them, but it's really the deer that are munching down, particularly when you have an overabundance of deer. This is my yard. One, two, three, four, five, six. Oops, come back here. Seven, eight. I mean, we got a lot of deer. And they eat all the natives and they don't eat the non-natives. So what's left? It's the non-natives. It's the invasive species. You cannot control invasive plants without controlling your deer population because the natives that are trying to come up and compete with them will get eaten by the deer. When you have deer exclosure experiments, our natives are quite competitive. They're very good at competing with non-natives, but not if they're eaten by a deer. Is it possible to kill woody invasives without herbicide? Yes, particularly if the invasives are not stoloniferous. So, in other words, if they don't send out stolons underground and come up feet away from the main trunk. And this message is coming from Dennis Conover, the University of Cincinnati. What you do is you cut out a square of black plastic, heavy black plastic, so maybe a hefty garbage bag or double it over, staple it down over the stump of the invasive that you have cut. Things like almer, honeysuckle, or barberry, or autumn olive, or um, Euonymus elatus. What is that? Burning bush, burning bush. Those things you can cut off, cover with the black plastic, staple it down with garden staples, and then leave it for a year. And what you're doing is excluding light from that stump, and it will kill it over time. Now, if you have acres of invasives, this is going to be really unwieldy. But if you have just a few and you don't want to use any herbicides, this will work. This also works. The weed wrench, you're yanking them out, roots and all. The simplest thing would be a mattock. That's a pickaxe with a broad end. You just circle it and whack out those roots. It's really effective. You can get things that are quite big this way. So you don't have to use herbicides, although it is much faster if you use herbicides. You do have to kill the roots. If you don't kill the roots, just cutting it back, you'll be doing that the rest of your life. They come back forever. What about the risks of bringing nature into our everyday spaces? Isn't interacting with nature dangerous? Well, it used to be. Lions used to eat us, and water buffaloes used to stample us, trample us. If you fell in the river, that wasn't good. Hyenas cleaned it all up. It was a dangerous world out there. But you know what? Not anymore, particularly in North America. The problem is our ability to assess risk is really, really poor. There are measurable risks of being outside. For example, we do have venomous snakes in this country, and there are about 2 deaths per year recorded. We have West Nile virus, about 130 deaths per year, and it's usually old folks like me. But let's look at what's really killing us. Smoking. There's still 400,000 deaths per year from smoking. Alcohol, 75,000 deaths. Melanoma, sunbathing, about 8,000 deaths a year with 76,000 new cases every year. Car crashes, of course, are big ones, 44,000. Collisions with deer, 440 people per year, 59,000 injuries by colliding with a deer with your car. Dogs, our best friend, are killing 20 to 30 of us. We're shooting each other, accidental gunshots, 500 deaths per year. Overdose, huge, 100,000 deaths per year. Texting, 3,228 deaths just in 2013. Cruise ships, don't take a cruise ship. 20 of you will fall off and drown every year. Hot dogs are killing 70 of us every year. Autoerotic asphyxiation, whatever that is, 600 deaths per year. Lightning kills 51 of us. Vending machines fall over on us and squish us. Toasters, 370 deaths per year. Flat screen TVs, 41 deaths per year. And selfies, I think that's 29 deaths per year. So selfies are 14 times more deadly than venomous snakes. Bambi's 220 times more deadly than venomous snakes. And alcohol is 577 times more deadly than West Nile virus. Can you guess how many people were killed by native plant gardening last year? Risk assessment. That's what the problem is. Should we kill invasive species? Do we have the ethical right to decide whether a plant lives or dies? It's a good question, but I imagine that the people asking that question are actually making decisions about what lives and dies every day. They just don't know it. So, for example, when you landscape with plants that do not support the insects that birds need when they're rearing their young, and that means thousands of insects, those babies are going to starve to death. You're probably not thinking about that if you plant crepe myrtle, and other such things. If you have a yard like this, you're deciding whether hundreds of species of native plants can live in that space and the thousands of animal species that depend on that plant. If you hire a mosquito fogger, you're not only killing a few mosquitoes, but you're killing the monarchs, the pollinators, the caterpillar bird food, the natural enemies that keep things in check. And if we don't control invasives, we're gutting entire food webs. Do we have the right to do that? So I'll answer that question with my own question. Why do you only focus on moths? Aren't butterflies important too? No, they're not. And by that, I mean they're not as ecologically important. Butterflies are just bad tasting day flying moths. This is the butterfly lineage here, the yellow here. It comes out right in the middle of the moths. There's moths on either side of them. They're diurnal, meaning they fly during the day, and they can fly during the day because they don't taste very good, which means they're not adding much to the local food web. So they're not adding a lot to the local food web, and there's not that many of them compared to moths. For every species of butterfly, there's 19 species of moths. And moths, of course, are what is driving that food web. They're transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. And by moths, I mean they're caterpillars as well, which is why Dan Jansen calls them the meat and potatoes of terrestrial food webs. Really important. You've got to have a lot of caterpillars in your food web, or you won't have a functional food web. And besides all of that, I just think moths are really cool. There's some that look just like a rhinoceros. There's some that look like a fish, and that is not photoshopped. Some look like rocket ships. Some look like stealth bombers. Some look like jet planes. Many of them look like lichens. They look a lot like lichens. A lot of them look like bird poop. If you don't want to be eaten, look like bird poop. Some of them will try to look like the flowers that they're eating. This is the camouflage looper, and they sew on petals on their back so that you can't tell that they're actually on that flower. If you eat conifers, you want to look exactly like the conifer needles. There are two caterpillars in there. If you eat seed heads, like Helianthus seed heads, you want to look just like that seed head curled up in it. Many of them look like dead leaves. This is one of the very best dead leaf mimics. It's a fairly common moth in Japan. Really great. Some of them look like seeds. Some of them look like seed pods. Many of them look like sticks, both as caterpillars and adults. Some of them look like sticks that are broken at both ends. Some of them look like wood chips. When a woodpecker, like a pileated woodpecker, is pounding on a tree, all these wood chips go flying. They land on the ground. That's exactly what that looks like. Some of them look like clowns. Some of them are trying to divert enemies, typically birds, by pretending they have eyes on their hind wings. You can do that with 2 eyes. You can do that with 4 eyes. You can do that with 6 eyes. I'm not sure which one works better. Some of them have lightning logos on their sides. Some of them are huge. Some of them are really tiny. And many of them are beautiful, both as caterpillars and adults. I could talk for an hour about beautiful moths. Some of them have the startle effect. When their wings are closed, they look like a leaf, but when they open them suddenly, they look like something scary, maybe an owl. Some of them have 2 heads. Not really. That's a mating pair. Some of them, particularly sphinx moth larvae, look a lot like snakes. They turn upside down. Those are actually the feet there, and they've got these phony eye spots, really convincing snake mimics. Some of them look like bumblebees. Some of them look a lot like paper wasps. Some look a lot like yellow jackets. Some of them look a lot like spiders. The spider's legs are decorated on the wings there. Some of them look just like fireflies, lightning bugs. This is the species from Peru that not only looks like a firefly from the top, but if you turn it over, it's got a phony lantern on its belly, and it smells like a firefly. You have to be really careful to make sure it's not a firefly, but it's not. It's a moth. Some of them look like beetles. Some of them look like jewels. Some of them look like that. So they're just fascinating creatures to me, and that's why I like them. Do honeybees compete with native bees? I'm getting this question more and more, and it has an unpopular answer. And let's look at why. Honeybees are extreme generalists. That means they go to a lot of different types of flowers for honey and or for nectar and pollen. And they're large hives, about 30,000 bees in a mature hive. They can forage 2 miles from that hive. So a single hive can potentially compete with native bees over 8,000 acres of land. Beekeepers supplement their hives with sugar. So even when the density of flowers is low in the landscape, the number of bees in that hive remains high because they're putting sugar in there to keep them going. As of April 2022, there were 2.92 million hives in the US, which means honeybees have saturated continental US 11.5 times. Now, if we assume the number of native bees out there is near the carrying capacity, so in other words, there's as many native bees as there are flowers that can support them, and then you add a single hive of 30,000 bees to that area that's already saturated by native bees, there's no way that's going to happen without competing for the resources those native bees need. There was an interesting experiment came out last year, actually two different experiments. This one was on an island that had no honeybees. So they measured nectar availability and pollen availability and the native bee populations. And then they introduced honeybees and watched what happened. Nectar availability decreased by 60%. Pollen availability decreased by 30%, and native bee populations crashed by 80%. So the evidence is pretty strong that honeybees really do compete with native bees. Okay, oaks are dying right and left. As we cut them down, should we leave the logs that are there or have them hauled away in order to prevent the infection of other trees? We do have a number of serious diseases hitting our oaks now. We've got bacterial leaf scorch. We've got sudden oak death syndrome. We've got oak wilt. This is a red oak in my yard that is just about dead at this point. So when it dies, should I leave the log there or should I carry it away? Well, the disease transmission occurs when the tree is alive. The disease organisms are in the vascular system, and insects that suck on the plant will pick it up and carry it to another tree. But once the tree is dead, then there's no more disease transmission. So you do have, we call it coarse woody debris, and I would encourage you, if you have the chance, to leave it on your property because an awful lot of creatures really depend on it. And some of them are really tiny, like columbilans. A number of species of columbilan springtails are there by the millions. The things that eat those columbilans are there, centipedes and many other types of predators. Millipedes are there, eating the fungus that's associated with that tree. Lots of species of beetles actually breed in downwood, like click beetles. This is a fire color beetle. If you peel up the bark of a log on the ground, you often find these guys. They're pretty common. What's interesting is you never see the adults. Where are the adults? I don't know. I never see them. A lot of scarab beetles are breeding in logs on the ground, stumps. Cerambycid longhorn beetles and the larvae that are called flat-headed borers are very common in dead wood. So are leucanid stag beetles, so are passalid best beetles, so are buprestid metallic wood-burning beetles. A lot of beetles associated with dead wood. It's also the place where a number of the butterflies that overwinter as adults will spend the winter. They get into the cracks and they just sit there all winter long. Things like mourning cloaks, commas, question marks. They're all overwintering in dead logs. This is where carpenter bees breed every time they get the chance. The reason they're in our soffits and our railings on our porches is because we've taken away the resource they actually need to breed. So if we put that coarse woody debris back, our carpenter bee problems will be diminished. And how about carpenter ants? Carpenter ants do not eat wood like termites. They simply hollow out damaged wood and have their nest in it. They live in it. And the reason we want carpenter ants is because that is what the large woodpeckers, our pileated woodpeckers and red-bellied woodpeckers and flickers, that's what they rear their young on. So you won't have pileated woodpeckers unless you have a lot of carpenter ants, and you won't have the carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that support those carpenter ants. Is rearing monarchs good or bad? It depends on what your intentions are. There's typically two reasons people rear monarchs. One is for fun and educational purposes, and the other is for conservation. I think rearing monarchs or other butterflies or giant silk moths is great for education and fun, particularly for our kids. It's a wonderful introduction to nature. It's a great introduction to nature for their parents as well. They get to learn what the life stages are for complete metamorphosis, egg, larva, pupa, and adult. They get to learn about host plant specialization. I bet I can ask any third grader in this country what monarchs need to survive, and they'll tell me milkweeds. That is host plant specialization. But rearing for conservation does have issues. It's very difficult to do that without crowding them. And crowding them, of course, is a perfect recipe for disease transmission. It also removes when you rear monarchs inside, it's removing them from the filter of natural selection outside. There's a lot of things that are picking the very best monarchs for survivorship outdoors. And so if we're rearing them indoors, that filter is not there, and we end up um, the potential of diluting the gene pool with genes that aren't so great. And then finally, even people that are really enthusiastic about saving the monarch don't know how to rear them. They're not so good at it. They don't change the leaves often enough. And what happens is the monarch comes out smaller than it needs to be. So when they release them, survivorship is not as good. There was an interesting study last year that looked at tagged monarchs, monarchs that had been tagged. This is down in Mexico where they're spending the winter. Monarchs that had been tagged, that had been reared indoors versus monarchs that were tagged reared outdoors. And there's a 40% decrease when compared to wild butterflies that have been tagged. So there does seem to be a real cost when we rear them indoors. It doesn't mean if you're particularly good at it that you can't do it. That's just a generality. The best way to support monarchs, though, is to give them what they really need when they're breeding, and that is a large patch of milkweeds, and give them what they need when they're migrating, and that is flowering plants in the fall. So things like fall asters, goldenrod, the things that are going to provide the nectar as they fly south to Mexico. The monarchs on my milkweed keep disappearing. Just when they get big, they disappear. I assume birds are eating them, but I thought monarch caterpillars tasted bad, so I'm confused. What is stealing my monarchs? I get the same question for other types of butterflies as well, black swallowtails. And the answer is nothing is stealing your caterpillars. What happens is that these caterpillars, once they reach the full size, will crawl off the host plant and form their chrysalis someplace else. So this is a monarch chrysalis, and look, it's on grass in my yard. I've never found a monarch chrysalis on milkweed. The reason they crawl away from milkweed is they want to get away from their host plant because the natural enemies find these guys by finding the host plant first. They find the milkweed, and then they find the caterpillar or the chrysalis. So for safety reasons, they crawl away as far as they can. This is a pipevine swallowtail chrysalis. I found a pipevine swallowtail, and look, it's on grass, not on pipevine. I found a pipevine swallowtail chrysalis on the lower edge of a picture frame in my living room. A couple of years ago, it had crawled up our back steps, in through the sliding glass door, across to the living room, and up the wall. It was about 25 yards from the actual pipevine plant. So they go a good distance before they form their chrysalis. So the bottom line is that nothing's taking your caterpillars. They're simply forming a chrysalis where you are not looking. Could you provide your thoughts on the use of southern, more heat-tolerant species within more northern parts of the U.S.? Yes, I can. This is called assisted migration. And it's controversial, but I'm not a fan, and I'm not a fan for two reasons. First of all, we talk about global warming as if the planet is slowly warming and things can just simply move north and it'll be great. But what's really happening is increased climate variability. This is the jet stream, and it moves across North America like this. It always wobbles a little bit, particularly in the wintertime. But generally, it's colder above the jet stream and warmer below the jet stream. These days, the jet stream is not well behaved at all. It has huge wobbles. And when it goes way far north, then it's too warm up here during the wintertime. But when it goes way far south, it's too cold. And you know what? Right now, as we speak, we're having a southern wobble of the jet stream. It snowed in Florida this year. It snowed in Baton Rouge, Louisiana last year. They got 9 inches of snow, and it got down to 9 degrees. Killing all kinds of plants, including natives. So it's these wild swings that represent the future. We call them polar vortices. And if we take southern plants and move them north, it's going to be very, very rough on them. That's one reason I'm not a fan. The other reason is if we're moving plants away from the community they co-evolved with, they're not going to perform the roles they need to in their ecosystem. And I'm talking about sharing the energy they capture from the sun, typically by having insects eat them and then something else eats the insects. That's how energy from the sun moves through food webs. But if you take a southern plant and move it to areas where the insects don't know it, it's not going to share its energy, and it'll be just like introducing a plant from Asia. So I hope we can get a handle on climate change. That would be the best thing to do. But I hope there's enough genetic variability in our plant populations so that many of them actually can adapt to these crazy swings in climate that we're throwing at them. What do you think of No Mow May? I think it's a good intention, but it makes no ecological sense at all. It's actually an idea that came from England. They got a lot of lawns over there, and they're good-looking lawns. But they realize they also have a biodiversity crisis in England. So they said, well, let's not mow the lawn in May, and that'll help pollinators. Well, if you don't mow your perfect lawn in May, this is what it looks like. This is a house down the street from me that went through foreclosure. It was a great looking lawn, and when you don't mow it, it's a tall, great looking lawn. But it still isn't providing anything for pollinators. If you have a lousy lawn and it's full of dandelions and dead nettle and white clover and other things you're not supposed to have, you will supply some nectar and pollen for particularly things like honeybees that are extreme generalists. Some bumblebees can use those plants. And then in June, you mow it and you pull the rug out from under those bees. Our bees, our native bees and the honeybee need forage all season long. They need, so in most places, it's at least from April right through to early October, not just in May. So what we really need is no mow areas. And we call that a pollinator garden. You can have your lawn other places, but places where you're never going to mow, you are going to have a sequence of blooms from early season all the way to late season. And that is what's going to support the pollinators. You can go crazy like this. The pollinators will love it, or you can be very discreet about it. But that's the challenge: is to have areas that you're never going to mow, and a sequence of blooms, particularly of the plants that are gonna help the specialist pollinators. You know, we got between 3,600 and 4,000 species of native bees, and over a third of them can only reproduce in the pollen of particular plants. So you wanna put those plants that the specialists use in your garden because the generalists can use those as well. If you only plant for the generalists, you're losing about 30% of our native bees. Do you have a succinct statement to submit to my HOA who recently cited me for growing weeds? You know, a weed is a plant out of place, and native plants are not out of place in North America. But I get it. I don't have anything that's succinct, but try this. We humans live, no, we humans face life-threatening crises from climate change and biodiversity loss. Reducing the area of lawn and using more productive native plants in our landscape addresses both of these crises. This can be done tastefully without the use of chemicals and without reducing property values. It is the future of landscaping. Try that. If it works, let me know. Another HOA question. My HOA believes native plants reduce property values. How can I convince them otherwise? By making a property that doesn't reduce property values. And this would be one. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design. You don't get more formal than that. And every plant in that landscape is a native plant. And believe me, Lynn's HOA would not throw her out. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. This, in contrast, is a 100% non-native plant design landscape. That's a Norway maple. These are Asian azaleas. That's English ivy on the wall. This is pachysandra on the ground, and our typical cool season European grasses. But I can see this person being cited by their HOA because it's messy. It's not well kept. So what HOAs really worry about is not the design, but the upkeep, the management. This is Pam Carlson's property in Chicago, 100% native landscape, except for the little bit of lawn here. And no HOA is going to throw Pam out. So really, it's how you manage and design your landscape that's going to make the difference. I have a small property. Should I plant several individuals of a few species, or should I try to squeeze as much diversity onto the property as possible, but only have one or two individuals of each species? Well, the answer is it depends on what you're managing for. If you have a small property, you cannot have all the plants that are in your ecosystem on that one property. Let's say you're managing for the monarch. I got a call, I believe it was several years ago. A woman said, I planted a milkweed, but worms got on them, so I squished them. The worms, of course, are monarch butterflies. So we need a little bit of education here, but you also need more than one milkweed rammet because you'll get a couple of monarch eggs on there, and the caterpillars get large, and they will eat all the leaves, and then they'll starve to death, and you think that they've killed your milkweed. It'll actually come up from the roots again, but what you really need is a monarch patch, and then your monarch's never going to run out of milkweed. You'll support a whole bunch of them, but then you have less diversity. Let's say you want to help pollinators. This is black-eyed Susan. When you have a massing like this, the bees can go from flower to flower using very little energy at all. So it makes it really efficient for them. They love it, but it's less diversity. So this is the chance to actually increase diversity in your little ecoregion. This is a brand new neighborhood. Get to know your neighbors. Divide up the responsibility here. Who's going to have the oak trees and the little woodlots? Who's going to have the meadow? Who's going to have the rain garden? And that way you can get a lot of diversity into a fairly small area without trying to cram it all onto your property. But you have to talk to your neighbors. How can I convince my neighbor to stop mosquito spot fogging? This, of course, is a huge issue around the country. Booming business. A lady came up to me the other day and she said, my neighbor is fogging. And I actually went up to them and I asked them what they're afraid of. And they said they're afraid their kids are going to die from a mosquito-borne disease. Okay, so I looked into the statistics of kids that are dying from mosquito-borne diseases. And between 1999 and 2007, there were 3 kids who died from a mosquito-borne disease. It's a real figure. That's 0.37 deaths per year. In comparison, 8,760 kids died in car crashes during that time period. 73.2 million kids under the age of 16 in the U.S. If you do all the math, it turns out to be 1 in 197 million chance of dying from a mosquito-borne disease at any one time for kids, which means the chance that they will win the lottery, I think it's about 3 times that. They'll win the lottery 3 times before they die from a mosquito-borne disease. So it's a measurable threat, but it's a really small one. The next thing you do is explain that there are real ecological costs to fogging. Fogging kills all the insects that are out there, including the mosquitoes, the pollinators, the natural enemies, not just mosquitoes as claimed. We did a study this past summer. We're writing it up now for publication. We looked at 25 different species of arthropods, insects and other arthropods from 9 different orders. In other words, every single thing we tested with mosquito barrier sprays died even 30 days after the spray was applied. So if you have a mosquito fogger come to your property twice a summer, you have a totally dead landscape the entire summer. So tell them what the costs are. Say, hey, get a yard sign like this. No mosquitoes means no fireflies, no ladybugs, no butterflies, no pollinators, no hummingbirds, no songbirds. Most people don't realize that's what they're buying when they hire a mosquito fogger. And then finally, give them an alternative. You can actually fight the mosquitoes in your yard with mosquito dunks. It's Bacillus thuringiensis, a natural bacterium. You can buy it at the hardware store. You put it in a bucket of water where the mosquitoes lay their eggs. You can turn a fan on and sit when you're outside, sit in the breeze of the fan. The mosquitoes don't fly into it. So there are non-lethal ways, non-target, where you're not going to hit any non-target insects to actually control the mosquitoes and enjoy. This is the Native Plant Finder on the National Wildlife Federation website, and it lists the most important woody and herbaceous plant genera in your county if you search by your zip code. This is for every county in the country. We do know what to plant to support those caterpillars. But now we need to think about how we're going to landscape under the plants that we put in our yard to support caterpillars. And we're especially talking about the big trees. I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. 94% of them drop from the tree and pupate after they finish eating the leaves. They finish growing. They drop from the tree and they pupate underground. They wiggle their way underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. And that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. We don't landscape under our trees with caterpillars in mind. And we mow and compact the area so it's rock hard, very difficult for those caterpillars to get to safety, which means this becomes an ecological trap. This is an oak tree. The moths come in, lay their eggs, caterpillars grow and drop down and then die. So what we want to do is create areas under our trees where the caterpillars are going to survive, where they're going to be able to pupate. This is what Heather Holm calls soft landing. The caterpillars fall down, and it's really not about making it a soft landing. It's about keeping the ground from being compacted by machinery and our feet and allowing leaf litter to accumulate under there because that's what the caterpillars need. This is what we do. This is a wonderful oak tree. I pass it on the way to work every day, but the caterpillars developing on that tree are going to have a rough time in this grass. And most of the area under our trees in front yards, 81% is either grass or pavement. Emma Jonas, my grad student, measured that last year. If you have grass under your tree, the caterpillars get hung up in the thatch and then they pupate right there within 1 centimeter of the surface. If there are leaves as mulch or regular wood mulch, they can get underground a lot easier. So when they're right near the surface, what do? We mow it and we walk on it. The pressure from a single footfall is enough to squish 44% of those pupae. A single pass of the mower can squish 46% of those pupae. So the way we landscape under our trees is creating a very unfavorable situations for those caterpillars. You can do your spring ephemeral gardening under these trees. Very, very beautiful. This is how you shrink the lawn and you make it favorable for the caterpillars. Use native ground covers like wild ginger. This is Virginia creeper, which is a great ground cover. Mayapple, foam flower, ferns. If you can see the ground, you don't have enough plants. We're talking about green mulch. It can be beautiful, and it's a really productive landscape. The other thing you want to think about is providing night forage for our moths. Most of them are nocturnal. Many of them do have mouth parts and they're sucking nectar when they can. So you want to put plants that bloom in at night, things like buttonbush and evening primrose and perennial sunflowers, goldenrod, common milkweed, white snakeroot in the fall. All of those are providing nectar for our moths at night. Go out with a flashlight and look at your milkweed when it's in bloom. You'll see all the things that are using it at night. This is a trail camera that caught the fact that these moths are actually really attracted to moose tears. So if you have any mooses, you tie them up in your yard and you can help the caterpillars that way. If you don't have a moose, get a wine rope. So this is a rope. You just create it, right, wrap it around and make it nice and thick. Then you soak it in a bottle of cheap red wine and dark brown sugar. Make sure all the sugar dissolves. Soak it, and this is what you get. These are moths, particularly in the fall, called winter moths. Anytime it's above 50 degrees, your rope's going to look like this, and they're sucking on that nutrients. Normally, they're going to wounds on a tree, but in a typical suburban yard, there's not nearly enough wounds on the tree. This helps them survive and lay more eggs. Okay, do cultivars and native plants have the same ecological value as their parent species? This used to be the most common question I got, and the answer is it depends on what the cultivar trait is. So it's not a yes or no question. We did do an experiment at Mount Cuba Center, a common garden experiment, where we looked at 6 common cultivar traits of woody plants where you have leaf variegation, you take a tall plant, make it short, introduce disease resistance, take a green leaf, make it red or purple. These are common cultivar traits. Grew the plants next to their straight species, measured insect use for 3 years, and we found the only trait that consistently reduced insect use was taking a green leaf and making it red or purple. So I can say avoid the red leaf cultivars if you're trying to help the insects. But most cultivars focus on flowers. Double flowers, for example, take the reproductive part of the flower and turn it into a petal. It's beautiful, but it makes it ecologically useless. It actually is an ecological trap because the bees will come in thinking there's things there. They're spending energy doing that, but there's no nectar and no pollen for them. If you want to know our best knowledge in terms of how perennials are doing. If you have straight species and the cultivars of those perennials, go to the Mount Cuba Center website, and they have been doing trial gardening with native plants for several years now. All that information is up on their website. Maybe your favorite cultivar is there as well. Are we really in the 6th great extinction event? We hear a lot about the sixth extinction. Elizabeth Colbert wrote a book about it. I've talked about the sixth extinction. There have been five major extinction events on the planet over the past many millions of years. Each one of them threatened the very existence of life on planet Earth. And we're headed towards the next one. Are we there yet? And the answer is not yet. If all the species that are declining do go extinct, we'll be there and we'll be one of those species as well. A great extinction event is defined as the loss of at least 75% of the species on planet Earth. We have lost 13% of our species since the year 1500 so far. So extinction's happening far faster than it should, but we're not in a great extinction event yet. And that creates an opportunity. Um, what we're really in is a great defaunation event. Everything is declining, but they're not gone yet. So there's the opportunity. We can turn it around. We can increase their populations again if we get serious about conservation. We do know how to save these species. We can save them, but we have to get serious about conservation to save them. Does urban restoration work, or are you encouraging ecological traps that will lure animals to their death? It's a very good question, and we need more research on it. But the research we do have is very positive. Emily Geist in Omaha, Nebraska, and Brian Cutting in Newark, Delaware, one of my students, looked at how well monarch butterflies survive in suburban gardens versus natural areas. And they survive much better in urban gardens. So it was very positive. Look what artificial nest boxes have done for bluebirds. Bluebirds in the 60s and 70s were in deep trouble. They're cavity nesters, and we cut down all the dead trees, so there were no cavities. We introduced starlings and house sparrows that competed with them. And then we discovered that they like bluebird houses. They do well in our houses. And then we got bluebird trails. Everybody's monitoring them. Now bluebirds are one of the most common birds throughout human-dominated landscapes. Great response. Benedict Schmidt in Arguas, Switzerland, an urban area. He's a herpetologist, and he knows that 10 species of amphibians, were rapidly declining in this urban area. So he dug ponds all over the urban area and then monitored the 10 species, and 9 of them increased quickly. The 10th one did not, because the ponds he dug were too small for that particular species. But despite the lights and the roads and the traffic, these species were increasing. Again, very positive. But we do need more research to show whether it's going to work for everything. And final question, what gives you hope? How do you not become discouraged at hand? Well, I do have a rule, no news after dinner, because that can be depressing. But there are several reasons I am hopeful. One of them is that the biodiversity crisis is part of the global discussion. The UN has met at least 3 times to talk about it, try to come up with solutions. Well, last time was in Paris, I believe, in May. Every country of the world was represented there except the US. But it's part of the global discussion. And if we're not even talking about it, there's no way we're going to solve it. So that's good. But what's even more encouraging, though, is the public is starting to recognize that as individuals, we are not powerless when it comes to conservation. We can shrink the lawn. We got 44 million acres of lawn. Let's shrink that. Let's cut that in half, because lawn is not delivering any of the ecosystem services we need. We can use keystone plants, the ones that are supporting the most caterpillars that are driving our food webs. We can change our light bulbs. We can fire Mosquito Joe. We could put soft landings under our trees. We can add pollinator gardens. We didn't talk about that, but it's easy to do. We can remove our invasive species. That also is easy to do, and make sure that we replace them with powerful natives. There are states that are incentivizing conservation, like Minnesota has a cost-sharing program where it's paying homeowners to reduce or replace their lawns with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. Very positive. States are banning the sale of invasive plants. Delaware has banned the sale of all of them. Other states are banning them piecemeal, but it's starting to happen. It makes no sense to fight invasive species in natural areas and sell them in our nurseries. HOAs are learning that it's really not native plants that cause problems. It's what we do with them. It's what we do with our landscapes, how we design them and how we manage them. But what's really encouraged me is the speed with which all of these changes are happening. It's happening much faster than I thought it would. Ada Leopold said one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Well, he said that in the 40s, and he was alone in a world of wounds. But no longer. You are no longer alone. Everywhere, people are starting to heal the wounds on their little piece of the earth, and you can as well. Robert Swan recently said the greatest threat to our planet is believing that someone else will save it. It's not going to be someone else, folks. It's going to be you because you are nature's best hope. So thank you very much there. The Mount Cuba website that I cited, uh, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I'm also going to put your Homegrown National Park link in the chat. The first question is it okay to devote a home landscape to the growing of organic fruits and vegetables, even if some of them aren't native plants? Example, tomatoes. Wouldn't that be better than a lawn?
Yes, absolutely. A lawn is contributing nothing. A vegetable garden is contributing vegetables, and you're doing it. You get to control what's on those vegetables. You know whether you spray them. You're eliminating transportation costs. So it's very positive. So growing food for ourselves, it's not one or the other. You can do both depending on the size of your yard. But there's nothing bad about a vegetable garden.
Is there some way to get a link to the island bee study that you cited? It sounds interesting to learn more about. And then they said, thank you. It's always great to listen to you. You are a keystone in this environmental movement.
um, was this taped? This is recorded,
Yes.
right? So
Yep.
people have access to that. If you go back to that slide, the authors of that study are at the bottom, and it just put them in Google, and it'll pop that paper up for you. If you have
Okay.
trouble finding it, send me an email, and I'll send it to you.
Okay. Someone said, I tried no mow May, and it became time to mow. The tractor broke down, and we ended up with amber waves of grain. My wife thought it was something I made up to get out of mowing in May. She declared the end to the concept.
Well, again, one of the challenges here is the perception that we're not following the norm. We're not following the culture, and the culture is manicured lawn. So I suggest the lawn you keep should be manicured all the time. You're just going to have less lawn, and then you can have those areas that are not in lawn anymore. That's your pollinator garden or your other types of native plant gardening. So it's not a matter of having messy lawn. Have neat lawn all the time, but you're going to have less of it.
How can we get our municipality not to spray?
Uh, Let them know that you don't want them to spray. If enough people do that, remember, our elected officials are elected by us. If we tell them, you do this, I'm not going to vote for you anymore, and start with the mayor because he'll make sure that it happens, they'll do what you want. They want their jobs, really. But we're very quiet about what we want, and it's usually a few squeaky wheels that get what they want. And those squeaky wheels also are big campaign contributors. But we're working on it. The data against mosquito spraying is really mounting up, and I'm hopeful that that's going to change in the near future because it just makes no sense. There is no evidence that it actually controls mosquitoes. Mosquito fogging. So we're talking about adulticides. The trying to control mosquitoes as adults. We do want to control mosquitoes as larvae, and that's what those mosquito dunks are all about.
Okay. How long should we wait to remove leaves if we're going to remove them eventually?
Well, you want to rake them off your lawn right away. They're not going to help your lawn, but you want to keep them on your property in areas where you're never going to remove them. So that's those expanded beds. And if you really have too many leaves, then build a compost heap and put them in that. But there's no time when you're going to throw your leaves off. All the leaves that fall on your property should stay on your property.
Okay. We're getting a bunch of comments saying thank you so much. It was a great presentation. Someone said, thank you. I learned so much. I feel a lot less hopeless.
Okay.
This person said, "Thank you so much for everything you do. You've made such a difference. Now, people I would never expect to care know who Doug Tallamy is and what he talks about."
Okay.
Um, okay, here's a next question. "I live in Whitman, Mass., and saw fireflies in my wooded backyard last year. I'm excited to shrink my lawn more to encourage this more. Thanks for a great presentation."
Good.
Next question is, "Are there any issues growing natives on a septic leach field?"
You don't want to put your trees over the leach field, but it's a great place to have a meadow where you're not going to have deep roots. I know some of the meadow plant roots do go fairly deep, but they're little fibrous things. They're not going to rip up the concrete of your leach field. So I'd hate to have you see what my leach field looks like. It would give a sewage guy a heart attack. But so far, so good. Um, a lot of people said it has to be a lawn. It doesn't have to be a lawn. You can have productive plants there.
Okay. Is there a percentage of natives to non-natives to aim for?
Okay, only one study. That was a study by Desiree Narango, my PhD student, worked with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and that was exactly her question. What percentage of native plant biomass do you need to sustain a chickadee population? And it turned out to be 70%, which gave left 30% that doesn't have to be native. You can't tolerate any invasive plants because they are ecological tumors that just escape and really wreck our natural areas. But there are a lot of natives that are not, a lot of non-native, a lot of ornamentals that are not invasive. So you can have your ginkgo tree, you can have your crepe myrtle, you can have your hostas, and it'll be okay as long as most of the biomass on your property is native.
Okay. More thank yous. Let's see here. Just lost one. "I thought winter moths were the same category as gypsy moths and should not be encouraged."
This is a problem with common names. There is an invasive species called the winter moth, and yes, we don't want that. But there's a whole group of moths. It's probably 15, 16 species that come out. They don't even emerge until early November. So they, as a group, are called winter moths simply because they're around. You can even get them on Christmas Eve if it's warm enough. So that's the confusion there. Yeah, we're not trying to encourage the winter moth, which is from Europe.
Okay. "I live under a street light. Is there any chance I can attract fireflies to my yard?"
Um, the research shows that you will not have successful firefly reproduction, and that's because of the way they communicate with each other. The males fly and they blink, they flash, and the females sit in vegetation. And if they like that male, and they're judging him by how fast he flashes, um, they will flash back. And then the male finds where she is, and they do that back and forth until they get together. But if there is light around, so any light, any ambient light at all, the female doesn't flash back. That's what the research shows. So that pair is not going to get together. They won't reproduce, and if you do that long enough, then you don't have any fireflies. So it'd be interesting to see whether you actually do get fireflies when you have a permanent light there. But the research, and this is Sarah Lewis at Tufts University, says no. We want total darkness for fireflies.
Okay. "Are any invasive insects, for example, spotted lanternflies, serving as a significant food source for any of our native birds?"
Well, it's interesting. You talked about winter moth. Winter moth is a geometrid. It's not well defended, and the migrants love it. So that is one that is actually serving as good food for our birds. The spotted lanternfly is aposematically colored, meaning it's warning that it tastes bad. But it only tastes bad if it develops on Alanthus, which is its native host where it comes from in Asia. So if you don't have Alanthus in your landscape, the spotted lanternflies, they'll eat walnuts and they'll eat maples and things. There's no record of them ever killing a tree, by the way. So they end up being adults that actually taste good, and the birds do learn that. I'm finding we have very few spotted lanternflies these days, but I'm finding wings on the ground, so birds have figured out, okay, they taste good, and that means they're contributing too.
Okay. My town is proposing a rain garden to be built on land near me, which is protected wetlands. Pros and cons?
I guess it depends on what's there now. If it's a natural wetland, why do they need a rain garden? But I mean, rain gardens are good. You're trying to capture water and keep it on site until it percolates down into the water table. If the protected wetland that is there now floods all the time and you get a lot of stormwater runoff, then maybe they want to improve the drainage. I'd have to know the site to say whether this is good or bad.
Okay. The last person said, thank you so much. Oh, there's another one. Always so much to learn. And then someone said, any native you're excited to add to your garden this year?
You know, I have such a problem with deer these days. I've even lost my goldenrod. I've got to put a cage around everything. So just keeping the things I have is a major challenge until we get these deer under control.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doug. This has been amazing. And we're getting lots of love from the crowd.
Okay, you're
Uh,
welcome. Great group.
yeah. Yeah. I would like to let everybody know that tomorrow night, our webinar is Restoring Personal Ecology, How Principles of Nature Heal Our Overwhelm with Todd Brittenstein of South Shore Permaculture and Our Grateful Garden. And then I'd like to encourage everyone to come on Saturday to Kennedy's Country Gardens from 10 to 2, where we have our live expo. And then new this year, we're also running a shuttle from Oro, so you can park there and take the shuttle. Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, take care.
All right. Thanks.